I'd like to add something to the agenda.
Manager Shackleton?
We received some correspondence on Monday via email, and I guess I'd like to discuss it. It's not on the agenda, and so it's not an item, it's on the number 4 items. And I would like to take some action related to it, so I suppose if we could just add as item 10.6. Sorry?
About?
Correspondence?
The correspondence from the chair of the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners.
Is there a motion to second the amendment to the agenda? A second to the motion is what I meant to say. I didn't say it right.
To Manager Miller's motion?
To yours.
My motion to amend?
Yes.
Second. Okay.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye to this.
Aye.
Is the amendment?
Aye.
All those in favor of the motion to approve the agenda as amended? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We have 2 information items in correspondence. They are 4.1, 2014 Flowery Rush Reports, and 4.2, the NEMO Program 2014 Report. On the consent agenda, we have the approval of the minutes of the February 26, 2015 board meeting. That is the only item there. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Under board reports, first up is the President's report. I have attended several meetings since the last board meeting. On the 3rd, I attended the last comp plan kickoff meeting. Among the guests were representatives from cities, Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, Three Rivers Park District, Carver County, and members of the public, perhaps others. On the 5th of March, I attended the Minnesota House committee hearing for the Committee on Environment and Natural Resource Policy and Finance. Mr. Dawson and Mr. Palmer were there and met with the Representative McNamara afterward, and we got emails about those meetings. We submitted written testimony on both sets of bills, the Taylor decal bill and the funding to counties for AIS, and we submitted oral testimony on the decal bill. On the 9th, there was a meeting in the city of Victoria. I went with Mr. Erdahl and Mr. Whisker for a city council work session. The topic was the discussion of the draft MOU between the city and the district, and the city wanted to expand it and add a discussion of Lake Wasserman. That was the only substantive comment that came out of that discussion, so that will move forward to the 2 bodies. Last night I attended a meeting that was not our meeting. It was the Wild Ones Prairie Edge Native Garden Club, and our staff were there along with other watershed district staff presenting cost share information about our cost share grant information. The topic last night was gardening for water quality, so that was fun to see Heidi Quinn there. And the information she provided, the educational materials, was very well received. Next, we have the Operations and Programs Committee report from Manager Olson.
Thank you, Madam President. Lake Nokomis neighbors are making an effort to get going on the cost share project, and we discussed that. And we also covered our boat inspection AIS program for this coming season for delegation agreement, as well as the watercraft inspection cost share grant opportunities that we have. And then we also got into the freshwater scientific services and the Blue Water group to do testing and analysis of plants that are in the water bodies, upper and lower watershed. And finally, we had a discussion on further EIS grant opportunities that we've asked for, and we'll see if we can be successful with getting those. My understanding is that those are being moved ahead in our favor, so keep our fingers crossed.
And the committee made some recommendations for processing to the board on several of matters. Thank you. Any questions of Manager Olson? Next is the CAC report from Manager Casal, who was liaison last night.
Yeah, Brett, item presented, 3 cost share, the ones we'd seen in the operations committee meeting the week before, plus, one other, our condominium townhouse project, remember what that, put in as part, the townhouse project,
Parkway Place.
Parkway Place, they're doing, having to redo their parking lots, and they're, like, where they've done some of the streets and they made them narrower, so there's less car cover, so that's part of the project. And, Becky made a presentation on the, comp plan, did a nice job, she had tweaked it a little bit, it wasn't exactly the one we saw. And, there's discussion about, how the CAC could participate in that. And then there was also a nice discussion about CAC being ambassadors, getting the word out about how we want to work with developers and cities early on, as opposed to just being a permitting entity. And so there was a nice discussion about that. I think that covers it all. Good meeting.
Thank you. Any questions of Manager Casal? Are there any other managers who attended meetings or events they'd like to report on? The upcoming meeting and event schedules listed at 7.2. I would add 2 things. One is that on March 26th, before the board meeting, there will be an executive committee meeting for the purpose of reviewing the audit. That will be, for that purpose, President, Vice President, and Secretary. And at the end of this ends at April 16th, and just a note that on April 21st, there will be a meeting of the Metro chapter of MAUD at 7 p.m. in St. Paul. Are there any other meetings we should notice in this time? Then moving on to 8.1, the public hearing and presentation for 6 Mile Creek carp assessment, the annual report. Mr. Fieldset and Dr. Sorensen.
I'll just stand, just guys grab a seat. Well, I just, Madam President, managers, before, you get the annual report from Eric Fieldset and company from the U of M and Dr. Sorensen on the carp study in 6 Mile. I just want to provide a brief context for what we're doing out there and why we're doing it. The 6 Mile diagnostic study some time ago looked at 6 Mile Creek subwatershed on a systems-based approach. What we ran into trying to implement our capital improvement plan out there is working our way piecemeal through the subwatershed. We're running into complications, missing data set, inability to time our investments with local infrastructure improvements and the land use pressure out there. And so the board had said, let's take a step back and do a systems-based approach, and that diagnostic developed a nutrient budget for 6 Mile Creek subwatershed that looked at loading pressures that were coming off the landscape, and then also issues that were going on inside the lake related to shallow lake dynamics, rough fish, contributions to water quality issues, aquatic plant management issues. And out of that study came a recommendation to pursue diagnosing rough fish contributions and get more specific information on population density and migratory patterns and breeding habits and that kind of thing to inform future management strategies. And that's kind of what you're going to hear about tonight. All of that data combined provides a solid science background for our implementation planning within that subwatershed, which has been designated a priority geography for the district. And the information will obviously provide guidance on the stressors and then what are the implementation strategies to address those stressors. And the point of our work out in 6 Mile is going to be to align our implementation strategies with the local initiatives, priorities and investments, land use changes. And so that's kind of the next step is the implementation plan. We'll be taking this information and starting this year in earnest, doing local implementation planning with local communities, the City of Victoria, the townships, Carver County, and that work will begin more formally this year, later this year, but it's already started informally as Manager White mentioned. We're pursuing a memorandum of understanding, aligning authorities' mission and interests with the City of Victoria, and we've been sitting down with Carver County and Three Rivers Park District. So I I just wanted to remind everybody, what the work's about and how it fits in with all the things that we've already done already and what we'll be doing later this year.
Thank you. Mr. Fieldstaff.
Yeah, so work beyond this CARP assessment began in June of this last year. So this report will summarize activities from then up till February 2015. As kind of a reminder, so the university will provide us with monthly reports at the end of each month, as well as this annual report, which will be presented to the board the first quarter of the following year. And then a final comprehensive report on the assessment, and then that could include possible future management strategies, will be presented the first quarter of 2017. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Sorensen, Justine Cook, and Reed Swanson for...
Well, I won't say very much. Been a lot of introductory comments, but I'm very pleased to be here working with the Watershed District. And we've been finding some very interesting things about this creature, the common carp, that has been with us for about a century and has done a large amount of damage, and for which we've learned the only way forward is to really understand exactly where they're moving and how many they are, so you can be very strategic about it. And I think I'll just let Justine and Reed take it from here, because they've been doing all the work. I just sit in my chair, usually.
All right, well, thank you, James, Eric, and Peter, managers. So today I'll just give the project update on the Common Carp Assessment, and all the information I'm presenting is also in the annual report, so it's just kind of summarized our major findings. So I'd like to first start out just with this video of the common carp I like to show. I know you guys probably don't need much of an introduction about how damaging common carp could be, but this video illustrates their feeding behavior, where they scour into the sediments, picking out little particles, and then you'll see here the sediment just flushing out of their gills. So you can imagine, if you multiply this scene across your lake bottom, just how damaging carp can be, disrupting the rooted native aquatic plants, pumping up turbidity and the nutrients that come along with it. So for those reasons, carp have been the subject of management efforts for several decades now, and we in the Sorensen Lab have been studying the common carp for 10 years now, and we think the best way forward is using this science-based management approach, which is called integrated pest management, and it has three facets: using multiple tools, and using these tools in a way that targets specific biological weaknesses in the carp's life history, and then thirdly, implementing these tools in a way that's sustainable over the long term. So I just wanted to share, we've learned a lot over the past 10 years about common carp biology, and have identified some weaknesses where we can intervene with these various management tools. And one example is here we've learned that the carp form these aggregations under the ice in the winter, and we're able to use radio tags and radio telemetry, shown in the upper picture, to find these aggregations, and then we can contract commercial fishermen, and they can seine the carp under the net, or under the ice with large seine nets, and remove a lot of adults. So that's one tool that exploits a specific weakness in carp life history. Another example is we found that carp eggs and larvae are incredibly vulnerable to predation. And this upper picture shows the stomach contents of a bluegill sunfish, and it's just full of carp eggs during the spawning season. And we found where you have healthy bluegill populations, they can successfully predate on approaching 100% of carp eggs and larvae, and it's a form of natural biocontrol. So we can use this information in management by stocking bluegill in places where they're not, or aerating places so the bluegill survive the winter. So those are just a couple examples. But the third tenet of integrated pest management, that it has to be sustainable over the long term, this is very difficult to accomplish, and it requires a lot of information on the specific area you're trying to manage. So in this case, the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. So we really have to understand how many carp are out there, where are they moving, where are they breeding successfully, and so forth. And that's where our partnership with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District comes into play. And this stated purpose of this project, it's up on the screen, is to determine the abundance, seasonal movements, and recruitment patterns of the common carp in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed to enable the development of carp control strategies. So for the remainder of the talk, I'm going to go through those three things: the abundance, the seasonal movements, and the recruitment patterns, and those were the deliverables we identified in the project scope. So starting off with the first deliverable, estimates of carp abundance. So we set out to do this by conducting standardized electrofishing surveys, and we wanted to do multiple surveys per lake so we get an idea of variability. And in the scope, we said we'd do at least 7 lakes. This year, we ended up conducting surveys in 15 lakes. And we use those surveys to estimate catch rates, and then using established mathematical relationships shown on the right, we can translate catch rates into abundance. And while we're doing these surveys, we get information on length and weight, and we can then turn abundance into carp biomass. So that's how that works, and these are our results for the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. I know there's a lot of information on that table. I guess we don't need to go through it lake by lake, but we've turned this table into an image here on the left, and these are the lakes color-coded by carp biomass. So the green being the fewest carp, and then the darker the color, the more and more carp. And here I wanted to point out that the lakes shown in green, Zumbra, Sunny, Stone, Kelzers, Pearsons, and South Lunston, those are lakes where carp biomass is below 100 kilograms per hectare. And this is important because that is the threshold that has been identified where carp start to cause these damaging ecological impacts. So if carp are below that level, there's really not a carp problem. But anything above that, the yellows, the orange, the red, and into maroon, carp are a problem. And these red and maroon lakes, these are 5 or 10-fold, more than that 100 kilogram per hectare damaging threshold. And these are pretty incredible densities of carp. Some are even higher than levels we've recorded anywhere over the past 10 years in the Sorensen lab.
One quick question about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, just off the cuff, it looks like the further upstream you get, the better, the less the density. And I'm not trying to draw any correlation, or I'm not trying to draw any causation, but can you talk about potential, like, have you been able to think through a relationship between distance away from Lake Minnetonka?
Well, the one thing that I could point to is right here, just upstream of Parley Lake, there's a dam structure. I guess I'm not sure, what is that called? There's a drop dam, it's vertical relief, and carp are not able to pass that in an upstream direction. So over the years, if any carp, found their way downstream, then they're stuck below that dam and wouldn't be able to make it back up.
They seem to favor Hennepin County.
Yeah, and then I guess it is also interesting to point out that Pearson's Lake here, which is shown in green, and we found very few carp, but there has been some active management carried out by the Pearson's Lake Watershed Association, and they claim they've removed like 6,000 to 8,000 carp. If you added those carp back in, it would be red just like Wasserman. So there are, high densities of carp in the upper system as well. Yeah. And then I also wanted to point out there are 4 lakes, namely Stone Lake, up here, Sunny, Kelzers, and South Lunston, where we only were able to do 1 survey this year. These lakes are harder to access, and we had some issues with low water level late in the year. So these numbers should be viewed as preliminary, and we will collect more data on this next year, or this year and the following year. So these numbers might change a bit. So with that brings us to the second deliverable, information on seasonal distribution of carp and carp movement. So to get this information, we implanted carp with radio tags all throughout the watershed. To date, we've implanted 102 carp. As shown here, each one of these colored dots represents a tagged carp. So we've covered the extent of the subwatershed pretty well. And then we go out and we manually track these carp, and we biangulate their locations, and that's what this looks like, the receiver and an antenna. And we do this once per month. So far, we've done this 5 times, so from November through March. And then we are able to map these seasonal distributions, and we're particularly interested in things like winter aggregations and spawning movements to inform management practices. And here's just an example of what those maps look like. We do have maps for every single lake for every single month in the back of the annual report, but I just thought I'd show a couple. So this is Mud Lake and Parley Lake. And what you see are the pink dots are carp that were originally tagged up here in Mud Lake, and the yellow dots were tagged in Parley Lake. And then this is the November monthly snapshot. And so this was about 3 weeks after we tagged them. Those fish are kind of evenly distributed across both lakes. So we know that we don't have two separate populations here. The carp use both lakes and should be treated as a single population, a single management unit. But then interestingly, come winter, so this is a snapshot in January, all of the carp from both lakes form one really large tight aggregation in Parley Lake. And this is what we saw in December through the beginning of March.
Do you know why? I saw there was an article in Star Tribune about Silver Lake, and they indicated something very similar.
Yeah, we find winter aggregations almost everywhere we look for them. In this particular case, the reason that the carp aren't in Mud Lake and they moved down to Parley is probably because of water depth. Mud Lake is very shallow, it's 3-4 feet deep, so it experiences low oxygen. So it's advantageous to them to move into Parley to survive. But we really don't know why carp form schools in the winter. It's something we've been trying to investigate recently.
Is there a common thread between where they pool? No?
Not really.
Not really. Yeah, it seems to be in about, I guess, 15 feet of water, I would say, on average, and usually in places with a pretty steep shoreline. But that's, yeah, I
And
don't
good
know.
oxygen.
Yeah, and high oxygen.
I think they're doing this because they don't have much else to do. They're not feeding and they're not mating, and they just kind of hang out together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like, kids or something.
Yeah,
like
they're
that.
very social animals. Yeah.
Like kids at the mall.
Yeah. So
Not me.
Dynamite fishing.
that brings us
There's some dynamite
to
fishing there.
that brings us to the third deliverable, identifying the sources of juvenile carp. And this deliverable is broken down into kind of two different parts. So the first being kind of real-time information on the distribution and relative abundance of these young carp. And then the second is looking at historical patterns in recruitment. And by recruitment, I just mean, successful reproduction, year class of carp. And so we do that via aging. So the real-time distribution and relative abundance, we conduct standardized trap net surveys in August. And this past year, we were able to sample 21 locations, all of the major lakes, except for Halstead's Bay, and then also 7 additional ponds. We didn't sample Halstead's Bay because of zebra mussels. We would need to use a special set of nets, and we just didn't want to risk it, sporting mussels. So then for the historical recruitment patterns, like I said, we do aging studies. This year we completed an aging study of just over 150 carp from Parley, Mud, and Halstead's Bay. And this coming year, we'll do an aging study in 3 other lakes, yet to be determined.
What's in the bottom of the net?
In the bottom of that? Oh, that's just a snapping turtle we caught. This is from Crown College Pond, a pond on Crown College campus. Yep.
So who got the pleasure of reaching into that?
That would be me. He gets the bullheads too. Yeah.
And how thick are your gloves?
No gloves.
Yep. And this is a picture. This is a carp otolith. So that's the ear bone that we use to age the carp. And I have another picture of what that looks like under a microscope coming up.
Will you spell that word?
Otolith. So oto meaning ear and lith, stone. Yeah, ear stone.
And what is it again?
Inner ear bone.
Yeah, it's the inner ear bone.
The carp.
Of the carp. Yep.
And that allows you to age.
Yep, it's just like how would you age a tree, how there's annual growth rings. Yeah, the carp, they lay down deposits of calcium. Yeah, and you're able to see the rings, and I do have a picture of that.
How old are they?
I will show you in 2 slides.
Good segue.
Yeah. Well, first I'm going to show you the trap netting results, and then I'll show you the aging results. So based on our trap net surveys, there was no evidence of juvenile carp in the majority of the sites, 16 of the sites, but we did find some young carp at 5 sites. And those are these sites circled in red. So there's Mud Lake, Crown College Pond, Big SOB Lake, Shady Pond, which you can barely see, and then Carl Cray. So the catch rates were variable in these places. I have the catch rates on the table up there. By far, the most young carp we caught were in Big SOB Pond. And then we just caught a handful of carp in these few places and just one young carp in Mud Lake. And these are what the young of the year carp look like from SOB Lake.
So where are the carp coming from if they're not mating?
Well, that's a good question. So, well, it should be worth noting that, so this is just 1 year of TrapNet data. It's possible that in other years, there will be carp in more places. We'll know next year and in the year after. But in a place like this catch rate of 20 carp in a net from Big SOB Lake, that could equate to tens of thousands of young carp, more than enough carp to populate, an entire chain of lakes. So it's just, identifying.
I didn't get that nuance.
The new, yeah. So, yeah, this is just 20 carp in one of our nets, but, yeah, that can equate to a lot of carp.
But it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a disproportionately large number for such a small
Yep.
water body.
Yeah,
We've seen this before many times.
yeah,
The problems lie often in these outlying areas that are kind of neglected, and that's where the young are coming from.
Okay. So
If
not.
that trend holds true, that's very good news.
yeah, because from a management perspective, these small places, they're a lot easier to manage for carp than dealing with young carp throughout your entire watershed.
As long as the private owner of SOB lets
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
You know.
And he seems open to the idea. We've met with him a few times.
The lake's not named after him.
No.
His name, you picked it.
Yes, he named it. So as promised, here are the aging results. So I guess it's kind of difficult to see this picture, but this is what that ear bone looks like when we sliced it with a gem cutting saw, very thin, and then you look at it under magnification, and you can kind of see all these ring structures. So Reed and I, we each independently look and count the rings, and then he'll count the rings, and we come to an agreement on an age that way.
Like cats.
Yes, so this is our winter project, and it's very time-consuming prepping these and reading these, but you get some really cool information. Yes.
How big is a 52-year-old carp?
Um,
I mean,
It's at least 800 millimeters,
800.
so approaching a meter. I think that one was just under a meter.
you know,
3 feet.
Yeah.
Yep,
So 3 feet is
in
what?
pounds and feet.
yeah,
So the growth curve kind of stops at a certain point, so you can't tell age from length. That's why we have to do the aging studies. They can vary in growth, but generally they are larger fish when they get up to that age.
yeah, I could have showed a growth curve, I guess, but we find that at about 12 years old, the curve really flattens out, so you wouldn't be able to tell a 12-year-old carp from a 15-year-old carp by looking at it. They're all, just big adult carp, like you've seen, and sometimes the biggest ones might be, 20 years old versus 40-year-old.
How old do they get?
So the oldest carp we aged in this system was from Halstead's Bay. It's actually this exact carp. It's 52 years old. But the oldest carp we've aged in the Sorensen lab was 64 years old. It was from Lake Jarvis in Little Canada. So this is what the age structure looks like. So this is 150 carp. So you can see this is the number of carp, and this is the year they respond. And so what really stands out is, you don't have carp every single year. There's a few really strong year classes, like these ones. So if something happened in, 2002 and in 1990 and 1991 where the carp had a really good year, in the vast majority of carp, in this case, 63% of all those carp we sampled were from those 3 years.
Is it high water, low water, cold? Did
We're
it
not.
relate to, the historic weather?
We haven't had a chance to look back into the historic weather patterns here, but usually in some of our other work we find that these years correlate to really harsh winters. So then you have winter kills where your bluegill sunfish and a lot of your other native fish, they die off, but the carp live and then they spawn and there's nothing to prey on their eggs or larvae, so they have a really successful year. So that's what I would imagine, or possibly high water so the carp can get into places where other years they can't. So what we found was that there was a really similar age structure between Mud Lake, Parley Lake, and Halstead's Bay. So this is further evidence that these carp should be managed as one population, not individually lake by lake. They seem to be same population, and then, you know, again, that there's these few very strong year classes. So this is, gives us hope from a management perspective, because if you can find these nurseries and you can do something about them, that would be ideal, because the rest of the years, dating back to the 1960s, there's very little successful carp reproduction, so there's something in place for natural controls going on. So I guess that's kind of the summary of our findings for 2014, and in 2015 we plan on continuing this work, getting another year of data, and specifically for deliverable 1, we will complete an additional 3 electrofishing surveys for each of these lakes. And like I said earlier, we'll prioritize the lakes where we have the fewest surveys to get more information on those. And then we'd also like to possibly verify our population estimates that are based on these electrofishing surveys with mark recapture estimates, which is just a method that it takes a lot more work to collect, but you get higher accuracy data. And then for deliverable 2, for the carp movement study, we will implant an additional 18 radio tags. We didn't put any tags in Lunston Lake or Sunny Lake this year because of the low water, and we didn't want any of the carp to die over the winter and waste our tags. So we're going to do that first thing this spring. And then we will replace any tags that were lost due to carp mortality. So far we've only had 1 mortality out of our 102 tags, so that's pretty good. And then we'll continue our monthly tracking cycles, and we're particularly excited about tracking this spring and seeing where these carp are going to spawn to identify possibly more nurseries. And then thirdly, for the recruitment patterns, we will conduct a second round of trap net surveys in all of the lakes we sampled last year, and then we'll also sample any other new locations. If we see the radio tagged carp going somewhere where we hadn't sampled, we'll be sure to put our nets there and look for young carp. And then we'll complete a second aging study in 3 new lakes. We're not exactly sure where yet, but we'd like to get carp from the upper part of the system, so maybe Wasserman Lake, Auburn, and Lunston. We're gonna, again, see where our radio tag carp go this spring and use that to inform the location. So with that, I'll just wrap up with a summary of our key findings and what this means for management. So the first thing is, it seems like we have multiple subpopulations in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. It's not just one population. So this means there's multiple management units. Like I said, Parley, Mud, and Halstead, and then maybe some of these lakes, Stone and Zumbra, seem to be more isolated and have fewer carp, and then this upper system. But I have question marks next to these lines because we need to define them better, and we have to wait till we have a full year or 2 of movement data to see how often carp are moving between these systems. Secondly, we found that carp abundance and biomass is variable. Like I said, there's some areas where there's probably not a carp problem and little to no management is needed, and there's other places like Parley, Mud, and Halstead's Bay where we definitely need carp removal. We found that carp are forming these winter aggregation in most of the study lakes. The only place we didn't see aggregations was in Steiger Lake. So this is encouraging from a management perspective because you can use winter seine netting to remove these fish if they form aggregations. And then lastly, the juvenile carp, there seem to be restricted to a few locations, and in the lower part of the system, just a few year classes. So this is important because, like we were talking about, it's more manageable if you can identify just a few places and intervene. So with that, just end on a positive note. It seems like although 6 Mile Creek was daunting at the start and we didn't know anything about the carp population, we've learned a great deal, and it seems like there's definitely a way forward for management of carp in this system.
Thanks.
Yeah. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Manager Calkins.
This is kind of outside the bounds, but I'll ask it anyways. Halstead's Bay had a huge number of carp. Would you expect that the rest of Lake Minnetonka is similar to that or not?
I think it's hard to say. I think Halstead's Bay is definitely has higher carp than most of the lake just based on its water quality. but we do see carp moving from Halstead's Bay into adjacent bays. So the carp aren't just restricted to Halstead's Bay, so I don't know, it's tough to say without radio tags in the rest of the lake and just seeing, you know, how those populations interact.
I'm just wondering if you had experience with other lake complexes that are similar, and if there's any relationship there.
Nothing this large.
Yeah.
Well, it's total speculation, but I sort of wonder, they're not moving in and out of there with great high frequency, really, right, Justine? At Halstead's?
No, about 3 of our 15 radio tags we've found in the next couple bays over.
They're likely intermixing with other carp in those bays. They're not,
Right.
out by themselves, so indicate there are other fish out there.
Sort of tempting to expand out further into the lake, but that's easy for me to say.
Yeah, we've never sampled
We've
any
never
other
done
bay.
anything like that before, so it was a surprise to us, at least to me, to see so many there.
Where I live on Carmen Bay, which is Upper Lake, in the spring, the carp are so noisy that they wake us up in the morning.
Wow.
And I have gone down there to see mammoth carp. And then the bluegills and carp fight back and forth. The bluegills will come in and the carp will chase them away. Quite a drama. But it's nothing. It'll go on for days. We'll
Bluegills
see half a dozen at a
Probably
time
going for the
easily.
eggs.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
Because they're going toward the rock.
Yeah, and I don't know, Jennings Bay up in the northern part, the commercial fishermen have told us that there's huge aggregations of, 70,000, 100,000 pounds of carp. But I don't know, we haven't sampled it, but just from looking at the aerial photos, it looks a lot like Halstead's Bay, it's water quality. So
Same grade.
same grade, yeah, so I would assume that that's probably pretty similar to Halstead's Bay, carp-wise.
Well, good information. Thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone has any special questions or anything, don't hesitate to contact us. We're happy to
Thank you,
help.
Sorensen.
And if anyone wants a tour or something, we're happy to do that too. We've done it in other watershed districts. People
I
usually
like
like
amazed you didn't bring the carp.
Thanks.
We can
might-
do that.
That might be worth doing.
There are plenty.
There are no permits this evening. We'll move on to action item 10.2, resolution for acceptance of the 2014 MCWD brand manual updates. Ms. Mamaya.
President White, managers, before you is a resolution requesting acceptance of the 2014 Watershed District brand manual updates. Being distributed right now is the hard copy of the actual update brand manual that was inadvertently not attached to the RBA in this packet. So we're distributing it this evening, and pending board approval tonight, staff intends to attach it to the RBA for the consent agenda at the end of the month. So just to give you a little bit of history on this project, the logo that we've come to recognize and embrace here at the district was developed in 2009, and that was as part of a project to establish boundary signage along the boundaries of the district in cooperation with Hennepin County. It was determined at that time that the former logo was not legible enough on a sign, and so a redesign was needed. So in 2009, the board adopted a updated logo and style book that we have been operating with ever since. In 2014, as staff was developing district-wide signage templates, it became apparent that our logo needed a freshening up, if you will, and we needed a broader color palette and some updated fonts for legibility as well as for style, so that it had a more updated and fresh feel. So the graphic designer that the district worked with back in 2009 to develop the updated logo was employed to update the brand manual, and that is before you this evening. These updates were presented as part of the district-wide signage presentation at the workshop in February, so I'd be happy to walk you through the brand manual updates, but those were presented at the workshop, so I'd be happy to do that if you'd like. Otherwise, these are before you tonight for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the RBA?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have one quick question.
Manager Secretary?
Just as a memory refresher, there's the, this says MCWD, and spells out what that means. Where would this be used as opposed to any of the graphic interfaces?
Manager Shackleton, managers, that is a new one-color logo that we had designed for legibility on, for instance, signs that are viewed from a distance. The detail in our primary logo would not be visible, for example, on a highway overpass sign, which is incorporated into our canoe launch and our creek signage. That was adopted earlier this year by the board, for example. Also, if on publications, posters, or signs that have a dark background, the detail on our primary logo would be lost. So it was determined that we needed to have a new one-color logo for legibility, and it's also gives us a contemporary look too.
I'm just afraid that nobody knows what MCWD means.
Manager Shackleton, managers, underneath MCWD, it says Minnehaha Creek Watershed District.
You know, I mean, I get that, but if it's meant for like an overpass, it's hard to, people have to know what they're looking for. Do you know what I mean?
But by that token, someone who doesn't know what it is won't know what the waterfall logo means either.
I agree. I understand. I trust your ability to be judicious with it. So I'll support the motion.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, Manager Casal?
Just a request, Kelly, would you, since you have this now, do you have this, would you update the packet so we can refer to it electronically?
Yes, Manager Casal, managers, we do intend on doing that, adding it to the RBA for the meeting at the end of the month.
Okay,
Thank you.
So the movement was for,
We
to
have,
the end of the month.
yes, to advance the, okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Ms. Mike. Next item is 10.3, resolution to authorize execution of an agreement with Terramark. Ms. Mamayak and Mr. Wapner.
President White, managers, before you tonight is a resolution authorizing the execution of an agreement with Terramark to develop a continuing education course for realtors. This would be a collaboration between the Education and Communications departments. So Darren and I are representing those programs here tonight. And Mark Halstis with Terramark is proposing to work with staff to develop this course throughout 2015. So we'll also be hearing from him this evening. To provide you with a little bit of background, the board first was informed of this potential program in January of 2014 in a memo to the Operations and Programs Committee. Staff, in collaboration with the Planning and Permitting departments, has been looking for ways to further integrate the planning approach that is become the foundation of the district's work here, integrating our work early with our partners. And a realtors workshop became apparently a new tool. It became apparent to us as a new tool in the toolbox for this outreach. And so we began exploring that possibility. And after that was introduced in January of 2014, the Education and Communications departments began discussions with Mr. Kalstis here on the possibility of launching such a program, and incorporated them in the proposed work plans for 2015 for both education and communications programs. And those indeed were presented to the Operations and Programs Committee in June of 2014. And then the funding for this development of this workshop was included in both of the work plans that were included in the proposed 2015 budget that was approved by the board in September of 2014. And as you see in the slide, the breakdown, $10,000 of funding being made available in the communications work plan and $3,000 in the education work plan for the development of this program in 2015, with the plan to offer it as a continuing education course course with the Minneapolis Area Association of Realtors in the spring of 2016. So basically, the purpose of this workshop, this continuing education course for realtors, is A, to educate landowners. This is a group that has been historically somewhat difficult to reach, and through this offering, we would be able to reach many types of landowners, realtors, developers, and home and business owners through those various audiences. So in different ways, we will be able to educate these different groups through this workshop. Also, this continuing education course would be a tool in the toolbox, as I said earlier, to support the district's balanced urban ecology policy framework, which is a foundation for a comprehensive management plan update. And of course, the goal is here to forge new partnerships, foster an appreciation of the natural resources in land use planning, and in the end, develop more effective projects as a result because of that appreciation, being able to engage early with land use planners and landowners on projects.
Madam President, Board of Managers, I think Telly kind of outlined the background and purpose of this initiative. And what we have before you now is kind of some of the desired outcomes. And these desired outcomes are in part can be driven by the work that we do early on with some focus groups and some targeted discussions with the individuals that will be participating in this education program. But initially, as we looked at the desired outcomes, I think some of the common themes that were brought before you during the comprehensive plan information sessions are really highlighted in what we hope to achieve through this education program. You can see the heightened awareness of that land-water connection, the connection to the watershed district and our many programs that can support these interest groups, the idea of strengthening those partnerships, forming new partnerships. And what was seen through some of our programs is the advantages of engaging these individuals early on with their projects. So these are some of our our outcomes that we hope to achieve. In terms of the...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I want to make sure that we, in these courses, we use, all the natural stuff you're going to, what you're going to put in it. But in terms of talking about the creating value, both for the built environment and the natural environment, and they both go together. Like our urban ecology commitment. Is this can that kind of vocabulary be included in this course? So that people understand it's not regulatory and it's there's private purposes that are accomplished through this through adherence to good management of the environment and create private values.
Manager Miller, Board of Managers, I think when we looked at the balanced urban ecology and how we approach our work here from the Watershed District, I think that will really be at the foundation of these education programs, is looking at what is our mission of the Watershed District and how we can forge those partnerships with these groups. So I think that will be kind of really a cornerstone of what we develop.
Great.
And I think the next components really kind of talk a little bit more specifically about some of the program elements. And again, these are going to be driven by the focus discussions that we have with our interested groups. And those will help drive what the content looks like for the course curriculum, what supporting materials may need to be developed, whether it's fact sheets, whether it's information that we can provide on our website, perhaps a portal for these groups. And then looking at how we can provide more of a stronger outreach to these industry groups. And I think that's where Mark comes to the picture, is with his strong and diverse background of working with many of these organizations. And we're excited to work with him on this initiative. And I think Mark will talk with you a little bit more about kind of the timeline and the program development.
Yes, hi. Mark Haltzis with Terramark. Thank you for considering this and having me here tonight. I'm excited to be here. I've worked with the watershed now for quite a while to try to develop the concept of this initiative. And I think the staff outlined kind of an overview of what we're doing, but I think the point that was made by Manager Miller about trying to get this message out. It's a little bit different message than a regulatory message. It's more of an educational message, but as well as a partnership message that often has gone, isn't the message that necessarily comes from the watershed. And I know that's kind of the focus of what this outreach initiative would be, is to really change the message and then really look to these organizations to get inside of the organizations, offer some of the resources that the watershed has to offer while creating an educational opportunity that is required by a lot of the license holders within some of these organizations. And then try to establish the partnership basis so that as projects are developed, as land is developed, as people are considering purchasing land and doing things with it, early on in that process, the watershed becomes an integral part rather than just as a regulatory authority at the end of a project as just one other hurdle that somebody has to go through. So it's really trying to just become integrated with the process, get into that process early, and work with some of these groups to really get that message out that that's available. The watershed wants to become a partner in all of the development scenarios, and then also that educational piece that the watershed has the ability to offer while these projects are in the very early development stages. So with that, what we had looked at is a timeline where we would take maybe a month and a half to really work with staff to develop the message in an outline format, some of the key concepts, some of the key initiatives that the watershed would like to get out as a part of this outreach. Take that and then sit down with some key stakeholders in a couple of these industries, in these organizations, and try to just understand what they'd like to see from a message. What are some of the issues that they're facing? And try to just sit back and listen a little bit to what they would like, and how they perceive the watershed and what types of things we can do to try to create those partnerships. Take that back and then refine that message so it's one that we can turn into an educational in a format that can be accredited by the Department of Commerce, and then develop that program for the next maybe month to 2 months so that we can, by late summer, have a program that's ready to submit to the Department of Commerce for licensing for the continuing education credit. So that's really an overview. It's 4 to 6 months in that range to be able to go through and develop this. But I think the key piece of this is going to be those stakeholder meetings, several meetings that we have. And the watershed has connections. I have connections within those organizations that we're going to just try to utilize some of the key stakeholders there to just bounce this off of, and then also receive that feedback.
So President White, managers, one thing that's really exciting about this process is finding out what they would like to hear from us versus us developing a program in a vacuum and telling them what we think they should hear and what we want to tell them. So that's what Mark brings to the table, and we're really enthusiastic about moving forward with this initiative. And it will also help us craft messages for future presentations to groups in other settings other than a continuing education course. So this will lay the foundation for a unique outreach effort here at the district. So this resolution requests authorization to execute an agreement with Terramark to develop this continuing education course for realtors in an amount not to exceed $8,976. So staff requests approval tonight and moving it to the consent agenda for the next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, Manager Olson.
Do realtors have a requirement to continuously keep up?
15 hours every year.
15 hours a year, and do these count toward their 15 hours? Okay, so there's a built-in motive to put a person into the seat for each one of these classes.
That was the whole thought behind it.
Thank you.
Manager Olson, managers, that is correct. This would be offered as a continuing education course, so there would be an incentive to attend these courses.
Great, thank you.
How long does it take to get through the Department of Commerce approval process?
We'd be looking to submit by late summer. It's a several-month process for their review and accreditation. As long as we submit complete application, it could be even shorter than that. But our intent would be to give it the 3 to 4 months just as a buffer so that we can offer the program in 2016.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're on to, thank you. The resolution to authorize awarding the contract for the 2015 Stormwater Pond Sediment Surveys, Ms. Tomjancic.
Madam President, managers, before you tonight is the authorization to award the contract for the 2015 Stormwater Pond Sediment Surveys to Wank Associates in the amount of $54,152. Typically, bids are sought for a contract of this amount. However, in the case of the stormwater pond sediment surveys, Wank & Associates are uniquely qualified in their specific knowledge of the stormwater ponds themselves and also past experience in surveying the ponds. The attached contract and scope outline the deliverables, including the sampling and wet volume calculations for 10 stormwater ponds under management of the district, laboratory analysis for ponds found to have at least 50% or less wet volume remaining, a technical report which will make recommendations for which ponds are to be maintained during the winter of 2015 to 2016. And in our 2015 work plan, $160,000 was budgeted for the stormwater facility maintenance this year. In this case, or in the case rather that there's budget remaining after the maintenance of the stormwater ponds, the project maintenance and land management program will continue to develop a framework to expand the stormwater facility maintenance program as we discussed at the board meeting last July. Tonight we seek action from the board to advance the contract approval for the board meeting consent agenda next week.
Motion to bring this in front of us? Second? I'll second. Any questions or discussions? When we approved the long-range look at this, of the
Yes.
division of ponds, didn't we approve using Wank Associates at that time?
I believe so, that's correct.
Okay.
This is the contract?
Yes. Manager Calkins?
I was just curious, Edina and Plymouth have stormwater utilities. I don't know about Minnetrista or Victoria. And we've had discussions about who should maintain ponds. But has it been thought, do we have a policy that goes district-wide relative to who should be paying for these things, especially where we have cities who have stormwater utilities?
Manager Calkins, managers, there has been discussion in the past, as we did last July, about if there is funding in the program, past the maintenance that we are typically associated with, if we can expand the program to cover those cities and at least develop a framework by which they can be surveying the ponds and get a baseline level of information. And then if what we kind of considered at that time was if we can set up a maintenance program with them so that they cover the cost of the maintenance the first pond dredging, for example. And then we would look at maintaining that in the future.
So the ponds that are on here are ponds that the district built.
Or we have cooperative agreements with those cities that cover those.
Or what?
Or we have a cooperative agreement with those cities to maintain those ponds, yes.
Yeah, but like Gleason, we built the Gleason Lake Pond.
Correct,
So
that's correct.
that is the justification for why the district should be
Covering the
maintaining those
maintenance, correct.
ponds. Thanks.
Any other questions?
We had
No.
this discussion several times in the past, the same one, and it seemed to me, at least my recollection, which is somewhat imperfect sometimes, but is that we decided that we had those ponds that we established, they were none of them were maintained properly. I don't think there was anybody taking care of them. And the ones that were most obvious were the ones in Minneapolis. The Cedar Lake Pond and I think was the worst one. And that's when we decided that they were so visible and everybody associated them with us that we had to step in, as I recall. I thought we adopted the policy at that time.
Manager Calkins.
I'm not positive if it's a policy or not, but we did have those discussions,
Yeah.
and I don't have an issue with that. And because these are ponds that the district built, I don't have an issue with that either, but it does bother me a bit, especially when you have cities that have stormwater utilities, that the public could be asking, well, you know, they have a utility, why is the district paying for it? And ultimately, it doesn't, I guess, matter. It's taxpayer dollars regardless, but I think we just need to be aware of that and make sure that we're doing it properly.
Yeah, I feel really strong about that too, because these stormwater utilities are pretty hidden, and but the problems there they have to address is just enormous, and I think there's a big denial on everybody's part how big the issue is. So I think that these ponds wouldn't be taken care of in the way that we'd want to, with our name associated with them. I think I think there was a board action. It's recalling that that we were going to take responsibility for them, and not
For our ponds.
For our ponds, right?
Yeah,
Manager Miller.
they're a small portion of the ponds in
Right.
the district, and there's the whole issue with contaminated sediments too, which you don't seem to hear so much about these days, but I don't think it's gone away. And I know that there are some cities that are kind of sitting on things because of that too, but I think it's an issue that we need to come to grips with and work with other cities, because we do have ponds that aren't being dredged.
Yeah.
And if they're not being dredged, they're not working.
Yes, correct. Manager Calkins, Manager Miller, managers. Yeah, that's something certainly we've recognized, that there are many ponds out there that, you know, people don't recognize as being stormwater facilities. They think that they're a depression, or, you know, just that they don't serve a function outside of them being an aesthetically nice area or not. And so this is somewhere we can certainly add value. We're just surveying 28 ponds on a 3-year rotation. And so that we do have capacity outside of, you know, what we are currently doing to be looking at these cities that do have stormwater facilities that are kind of tucked away and people aren't recognizing that need maintenance. And then in terms of the contamination sediments, WANC will be doing surveys, sediment surveys, with analysis, lab analysis of ponds that have potential contamination.
Manager Miller?
They had a big vacuum truck on those swirling chambers out in front of my house last summer, and I asked the driver where he dumps it. Bremar Park. They dump it on just some vacant land in Bremar Park. So I don't know, that's in another watershed district, so I don't think we have to worry about it. But
It's like catching chipmunks, letting them go in your neighbor's.
Yeah, there you go.
Neighbor's yard. Any other questions for Ms. Domjancic? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Not that I've ever caught squirrels, but.
I think there's a DNR rule about that.
But I'm glad I didn't do it. Resolution 15-019, authorization to execute a cooperative agreement with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board for conceptual planning of other improvements to Minnehaha Creek and Meadowbrook Golf Course, and authorization to execute a contract with Wank Associates for associated professional services. We have Mr. Heeman, we have Mr. Whisker, and
Michael Schroeder.
Michael Schroeder. Thank you.
And Michael Schroeder's Assistant Superintendent of Planning with the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, here with us tonight to answer any questions that might come up. So, President...
I would recommend that if you have a contentious public hearing, have him in charge of conducting the meeting. He kept environmentalists, canoeists, and golfers all happy one night.
That sounds like a great skill to have.
Thank you.
I would second that.
keep that in mind. Madam President, Managers, the resolution in your packet is for action this evening, and it authorizes the execution of a cooperative agreement between the Watershed District and the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board to perform concept planning for Minnehaha Creek and Meadowbrook Golf Course. And it also authorizes the execution of a contract with Wenck Associates for professional services associated with that planning process in an amount not to exceed $28,760. The resolution outlines the history of the board's discussion as it relates to Meadowbrook Golf Course and Minnehaha Creek and its proximity to the district's work along the Minnehaha Creek Greenway. And really, the board expressed its initial intent at the end of 2013, right around the same time that the Park and Recreation Board had contracted with a golf consultant to evaluate golf within the park board in a systems approach. And then subsequent to that, we had 2014, where we underwent substantial flooding across the district and down Minnehaha Creek, and both Meadowbrook Golf Course and Hiawatha Golf Course sustained damages that are eligible under the FEMA program. So as you know, that prompted the park board to begin community engagement and evaluate how to bring golf back at both of those courses. And essentially, I think the park board is determined to undertake this concept planning, and through that effort and through their preliminary community engagement process, we've been working with their staff, and primarily Michael and Nick Williams, the superintendent of recreation over there, to develop a cooperative agreement that would allow the district and the park board to collaborate in the development of concept plans for this golf course, recognizing that it's in proximity to the Greenway, tremendous opportunities for creek restoration, floodplain management, which is obviously on the forefront of everybody's mind after this year, and really combine golf, non-golf, and water resource goals in a collaborative front-end loaded planning process, rather than being on the back end of concept plans that the park board develops in either a regulatory manner or sort of a commenting manner. And they've been, Michael's been extremely good to work with, and I think the park board's fairly receptive, I hope, to this opportunity. And next steps, if this is acted on tonight, would be to present in front of the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board on the 18th. Attached is the cooperative agreement, which outlines the goals of the planning process and the planning process itself. And I think it's worth just ticking through those if you haven't had a chance to take a look at them, just for clarity's sake. The park board and the district goals are listed in tandem in there, with the park board goals being to maintain golf as the primary use of the property, improve golf play to meet the strategic goals of the park board golf operations, and increase and maintain profit for the park board on this site. Obviously, increase flood resilience of any reconfigured use. If they're going to reconfigure golf out here, they want to make sure it's sustainable. And then also to explore the introduction of non-golf activities, including pedestrian, bicycle, and water trails to the golf course to the extent they could be reasonably incorporated. And then the district's goals that we've discussed in the past as they've come up through board discussion are to improve the ecological integrity of the stream corridor and any upland associated with the course, improve wetland function and value on site, and obviously to maintain or increase flood storage capacity, reducing the severity for surrounding communities if that's possible, and then finally to connect any potential work out here to upstream greenway efforts near Methodist Hospital and downstream into the City of Edina Parks and Trail system. The work flow, just briefly, I'll describe it in perhaps less technical details than they're in the work plan, is essentially to get together iteratively with the park board in a series of design charrettes. These are concept master plans. It's not feasibility level information per se. And to essentially come up with a range of different scenarios that look at a combination of golf and non-golf uses across the course. And those would be concepted out, and then the district would apply some flood risk modeling exercises to the concepts to say, this one's flood risk neutral, it's going to have the same flood risk potential as the course today, this one's more flood resilient, this one's less flood resilient. And that will inform the financial analysis that Park Board intends conducting to look at, revenue generation against sort of risk forecasts, which will help the Park Board make a decision on a long-term sustainable approach. So I think throughout that, there's plans for conversations with member communities at a staff level. There'll be opportunities to provide feedback to the board iteratively, but this work is going to be moving forward fairly quickly. I think we're hoping and anticipating completing the concept planning in 60 days with a series of 3 design meetings at a staff level with 2 to 3 weeks in between those meetings where we'll depart and perform our respective technical level analyses before regrouping and refining those concepts. And then at the end of that process, the Park Board and the district would participate in some of the final steps of community engagement that the Park Board plans to hold to sort of lay out these different, this spectrum of alternatives and communicate the information and get stakeholder feedback as one of the review data points before the Park Board takes final action. And with that, I'll take questions or turn it over to perhaps Michael before questions to maybe say a few words and fill in any gaps I missed.
There were no gaps. The only thing I would say is we actually have to take this to the board on April 1st and not March 18th. We have to slow down a little bit because of the board meeting activities next week. I will just, besides what James said, I would just say that when I first met with other staff, with James and his staff, James was very clear about not having the Park Board view the district as a regulator, that they wanted to be a collaborator, that they would only pursue this process if they could bring outside the box thinking to the process, which aligned exactly to how we were thinking about this. We have a long ways to go with our golf courses in terms of the quality of play, the quality of the environment, the alignment of the goals that you've outlined here align with our ecological system goals. So it really is a good match, and we're looking forward to pursuing this.
Thank you. This is an action item. Could we have a motion to get it in front of us?
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
I am really pleased with the progress we're making on this because it's going to be a major effort, and it's an incredibly visible project, and it's got at least 3, if not 4 or more other benefits. The flooding issue, I mean, my own neighborhood got affected by my yard. And it wasn't dangerous or anything, but the pond behind my yard that is the backwater from Meadowbrook Lake, came up a good 3 feet into my yard. It'd have to be another 17 feet before it affect anything, but it closed out roads in the neighborhood and stuff, and and anything we can do to increase the flood capacity there, and maybe perhaps a trail connection to through the Todd Park and St. Louis Park, etc. I think it's just really exciting and really shows the highest quality of professionalism that I've seen with all the cooperative efforts from all the different agencies and interests. It's going to be interesting to see how this comes out. Wish you a lot of luck.
Thank you, first off, and this is very exciting. So given the April 1st timeframe, how does planning for the Hiawatha Golf Course fit into everything, coupled with the next round of public engagement? I've had some people ask me about that already.
Well, from the Park Board's perspective, we're a little bit out of sequence. We wanted to bring the 2 projects forward together. In fact, we are working with the watershed, just a kind of similar cooperative agreement for Hiawatha, but because the city of Minneapolis is involved in that, they are trailing a little bit behind in their review of the cooperative agreement. I think we have a draft from Lisa Cerny in Minneapolis, so we'll likely be proceeding. I'll probably be back here in a couple weeks. Perfect. Manager Sheckman, we intend them to follow very similar paths. Okay. Is that fair, James?
Yeah, I don't know if you were asking more about timeline with regards to Park Board's community engagement process or decision.
Yeah, I was actually kind of thinking. I mean, the first 2 public engagement meetings, the discussions were about both courses,
right?
And we have in front of us this MOU, and I the second MOU is kind of slowed down with the city of Minneapolis, and what kind of time frame are we looking at in terms of potential next public engagement?
Well, we're probably looking now at probably early May, maybe even into late May to get the engagement happening. What'll be important and what we were finding in our engagements that we had with the Meadowbrook folks and the Hiawatha folks is where the Hiawatha folks are very neighborhood centric. The Meadowbrook Golf constituency is very oriented towards golf play at Meadowbrook. In fact, many of them came with plans for how they would actually redesign the course. So they're not really patient for our process. And it turns that these processes are just a little bit out of sync. I don't know whether we'll be able to bring them into sync and be able to align the two processes directly. But I think because the constituencies are slightly different in their orientation, it might work fine to separate them by a period of 2 or 4 weeks. We will be coming back and, in fact, we had a meeting this afternoon about reopening play at Hiawatha Golf Course, which will help, I think, the Hiawatha constituency understand better how we're making progress towards their interests there.
How so?
We will be opening portions of the golf course, in particular the driving range, probably Saturday, and we will be discussing on Monday opening at least 9 holes of golf at Hiawatha.
Very pleased to see these two great groups working together. I think this is going to be marvelous. Manager Casal.
Just out of curiosity, is anything like that possible for Meadowbrook, a partial opening?
We are looking at that. It's a little more difficult because we don't have a consecutive 9 holes to play, but we do recognize that there is a great constituency of golfers around Meadowbrook, and one of the things we are looking seriously at doing is kind of on a temporary way converting one of the holes to a driving range, so we can at least get some golf activity out there. We have staff who are out there. We have to be maintaining greens and tee boxes and other things out there anyway, so to the extent that we can find a way to open the course partially, even if it's kind of an odd configuration, we'll be doing that. We have to be cautious about how we move through this because if we do things like top dress, which we do frequently on golf courses, and we do that over an area that was damaged, it will take away potentially take away the ability to recover funds from FEMA. If we do any remediation, we can mow turf to a certain degree. It makes it easier for us to take a hole that was damaged by the floods and turn it into a driving range because people don't actually walk out there. They hit golf balls out there. So there are certain things we can do to encourage play. If we can find a circuit that it might be 14 holes or it might be 11 holes. If we can find a circuit that makes sense, we may pursue that.
And how long, since you brought up FEMA, how long is the process to get those funds so you don't have to?
We will likely be moving through a process of asking for an 18-month extension, and we'll probably be engaging in that discussion directly next week. We need to align, we have a lot of work to do. We need to align this, and we know that this work won't actually be starting until 2016, so we will need the 18-month extension.
I just want to say thank you. This is an exciting partnership. I mean, think
It
about
is.
the relationship between the two agencies 10 years ago and 15 years ago especially. It's nice to have the park board as a partner.
We agree from the park board side. Thank you.
Well, I can remember one of the first meetings I attended the second time I was appointed. We were talking about litigation for a little depression around the north end of Lake of the Isles after reconstruction, because we couldn't get cooperation whether it was a wetland or not, or just definition, I guess, and and it was not worthwhile fighting over. But this is a much bigger project and much more worthwhile discussion. So I'm really pleased because it's a new format for the park board to work with. I know you're used to working with the city, but not all the partners that you're going to have on this one with much interest.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. Curiosity question.
Yes.
Those drawings that golfers brought in, was there anything there that was unique or?
I haven't actually had a chance to look at every one of them. We've actually, the Golfers continues to submit things online. In fact, just last week, we got another entirely redrawn golf course for Meadowbrook, or for Hiawatha rather. So they continue to be actively interested in seeking their own level of improvements to the golf course. As we move through this, we will have a professional golf course architect designing the course. We won't be relying, it'll be a difficult thing to maintain an equal level of engagement if we start taking suggestions from the golf community.
Bill, I did hear that a tap room or a brew pub at one of the
The non-golf activities.
yes,
Yeah.
the non-golf activities was very much approved by the staff.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, just to be clear for the board, this is the one action tonight, which is a final approval action. It's not to be placed on the March 26th. agenda.
Thank you for reminding us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to move 10.6 down.
Did we vote on this already?
We did. Move to 11.1, Lake Nokomis Water Quality Improvement Efforts, 2015 Biomanipulation Project Work Plan Amendment. Ms. Dooley.
President White, Board of Managers, thank you for moving me up.
You're welcome.
I'm here to present the Lake Nokomis, an amended Lake Nokomis Water Quality Improvement Effort 2015 Biomanipulation Project Work Plan. It's a mouthful. The original 2015 work plan was based on a project to implement a 10-year walleye stocking program. The board approved it based on funds, shared funds from the SARD-SAMS grant application. So two points of information came across after the approval of the work plan. First one was the U of M did a survey, electrofishing survey in Lake Nokomis in August of 2014. And it was just one survey, so 1 point. But they found that Lake Nokomis had over 8,000 carp. That's over 298 kilograms per hectare. And what's ecologically sustainable for a lake is less than 100. So we have a carp problem in Lake Nokomis. And the second point of information was the SARD-SAMS Grant Committee did not recommend funding the biomanipulation stocking program. So we're back to square one. We don't have a stocking program funds from the SARD-SAMS, and now carp are a bigger problem than we originally had thought. So I'm organizing a meeting with staff from here, from the park board, from the DNR, Steve McComas from the Water Science, and we met in November of 2014 to discuss what should we do. What's the next step for Lake Nokomis? Do we stop, just continue to monitor it, see how the lake's doing in terms of walleye stocking, if they're still controlling or managing the bluegills? The group decided to shift the focus away from walleye stocking and to develop a carp management plan. So to use the funds that was approved in 2015, not for walleye stocking, but to actually do some investigation monitoring of the carp nurseries in the Lake Nokomis subwatershed. So have Steve McComas do steining in Taft, Legion, and Mother, and then 3 lagoons adjacent to Lake Nokomis. We don't know where the nurseries are, and just to get any idea of where the young of the year are would be helpful to developing a lake management plan. So the group agrees that this is the next best step, and we can do it with the funds that were approved from the original 2015 plan. And with the results from this, hopefully from the work this year, we'll be able to develop a plan to figure out how to stop the carp from reproducing and destroying Lake Nokomis. So staff would like to recommend the board to approve this amended work plan and forward it to the consent agenda at the March 26th workshop, or board meeting, excuse me. And I'm here to answer any questions about it.
Thank you. One comment would be that we don't approve work plans, we just accept them.
Okay.
And so that's the motion that we would need. Will someone make that a motion to get this on the floor?
So moved. Second.
Motion second. Any discussion or questions of Ms. Dooley? Manager Colton.
It seems to me, if I remember right, that the carp population is about the same as when we seined the lake last time. Is that right?
I believe so.
It's pretty close to that. You know, as I've been reading these, I somehow come away with the feeling that we don't have a truly comprehensive plan for Lake Nokomis. And part of that has to do with changing, and then part of it has to do with, we were trying to reduce sunfish numbers.
Mhm.
But sunfish are beneficial when it comes to maintaining carp numbers.
Mhm.
It's certainly possible, we don't know it, but it's certainly possible that we've created spawning grounds with stormwater ponds. And I understand that this is trying to get a handle on some of that. But it would be nice to, and this may get us there.
Mhm.
I think that you're right. I think based on the history, understanding what's going on with carp in Lake Nokomis is probably the #1 priority at this point. But I think we want to keep in mind that there are other things that we may not want to be abandoning necessarily. And I know that the DNR is still restocking fish, so that's not happening. But I hope out of this we can come away with a plan that's truly strategic and has a long-term focus of how we're going to manage, if we're going to manage, the whole system in Lake Nokomis.
Yes, Manager Culkins, Board of Managers, to address your concerns, we actually I just met with the Park Board, actually, and a consultant from WSB Engineering, who is the consultant for the City of Richfield, who monitors Taft and Legion for the Taft and Legion project that the Watershed District partners with. So all partners are at the table. We have actually already discussed tagging, creating Judas fish in the system, try to tag and monitor where they migrate throughout the next, wouldn't be this year, obviously, it'd be in 2016. So we do have some plans in place similar to the U of M research that's being conducted in the 6 Mile Marsh watershed, but we just don't have the funds this year, so that's why we just wanted to do simple investigational work, understanding where the young of the year are, where the nurseries are, and then from there develop tagging and a much more fleshed out development management plan.
Well, and as a piece of that, we've had discussions, and it, at least to me, remains unclear as far as how good of a connection there is between Lake Nokomis and the wetlands and lakes upstream from there. So I think, hopefully coming out of, and last year, it may have been an entirely different system.
Right.
Because of the high water. But I think it would be a benefit to the district on a number of different levels to understand that hydrologic relationship, and hopefully that would come out of this as well.
Manager Culkins, Board of Managers, that is actually correct. We at the table I think it was 3 days ago, on Tuesday, 2 days ago, that was a major discussion. How is it all connected? Is it piped? Does the outlet from Taft piped, or there's a daylight in Solomon Park? Who owns Solomon Park? Is it MAC? Is it the Park Board? It's MAC. So we actually had a flurry of emails this morning talking about who found out what, where's the connections. Now there's a connection potentially between Mother and Nokomis and no one knew, but the MAC thinks that they found records of that. So that is part of the discussion and will be part of the management plan. So.
Manager Miller?
I was co-chair of the original Blue Ribbon Commission, Blue Water Commission, I guess they called it. We should look at those recommendations because, again, I know it's some years ago, but we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on coming up with those and making sure. And I talked to Jeff Hamill, the director of the executive director of the Airports Commission, and they're interested in having the airport involved also because there's a opportunity to upgrade the quality of their natural environment. A little bit's left out there, but they have an interest in that. So we should follow up with that also. I'll make contact with Jeff and see who is the appropriate person on the staff. But now they put Waring with Richfield, I guess. But we should have a tremendous amount of information in that Blue Ribbon or that Blue Water study because it was all science-based. It was nothing about recreation or park improvements. It was all about the water quality. So we should revisit that. And I'm a little confused why we would study carp. Where would they go? I mean, they're in the lake. Or,
They're disturbing.
Hmm?
They're disturbing the sediment of the lake.
Yeah, I understand that, but we know they're in the lake.
But the idea is to find out where they're spawning and how they're reproducing in this system.
Okay, because I thought that, that pipe to the wetland to the south, north of 62, was just an overflow, that it wasn't permanent.
Well, that's the point I was making. We don't really know how much water comes through there.
Okay.
It looks like
I've
you have
heard it's
volunteers
almost
to help
nothing
these
and-
surveys. People want to know.
Yeah. But it's connected to the ponds that the district built.
Yeah.
And they're potentially spawning grounds as well.
Yeah, Manager Miller, Board Managers, I've definitely looked at the Blue Water Commission report, and we'll be bringing it to the partners to make sure we relook at that as a
Okay,
group.
terrific.
And then to answer your question about connection again, the district's been monitoring Mother Lake, which is on MAC property, for the past 2 to 3 years for this Taft Legion project, and I've never seen fish in there, not once, except this past year when we had high water, and it was flooded with juvenile young carp. So we have a connection, maybe only during high water times, and that's when they get to the nurseries and they can get back to the lake. But it's really dependent on water flow, and so we just hope to see if we can get some information this year.
Thank
We
you.
want to develop a good management plan.
Are we ready for a vote?
I have one quick question.
Manager
You
Shackleton?
said Solomon Park was, who owned it?
MAC, and the park board leases it from MAC.
So the park, really?
My contact through MAC connected me with someone else who works at MAC, and I had like 2 to 3 emails talking about, oh, it actually was piped under the park, and it's this thick of a pipe, and blah, 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 blah. And then the next email was like, actually, no, daylight's in Solomon Park, and it comes out here, and then it's piped here. So it's still a lot of misinformation, what actually is happening and what was done. So.
Interesting. Solomon was a Minneapolis Park Board Commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
Ready for a vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Going to my email here. Item 10.6, correspondence from the Hennepin County Board Chair. Mr. Shackleton, Manager Shackleton.
Thank you. So last Tuesday, the chair of the county board, Jan Callison, sent an email to the full county board and then copied our full board. And it was at the end of the day on Tuesday, and I'm presuming that's why it was never attached to the information for correspondence. And I guess the reason I bring it up tonight is that attached to it was a police report identifying embezzlement that Manager Olson brought to the Minnetonka Police Department. I don't really want to have a conversation of facts here. I'd rather send this off to the executive committee. And the reason for that is pretty simple. We met in October, and something very similar to this was brought to us. We unanimously said, send this to the appropriate authorities as the statute provides. That didn't happen until February 5th, clearly, because that was when this police report was filed. More importantly, within the report is new information that identifies the former administrator as acknowledging the expenditure of money on behalf of one manager of the board, and that, based on how we operate, doesn't happen. And so, for those purposes, it strikes me as something that, I'll just back up and say, there are a whole series of information in this police report that kind of tee up HR, legal, and frankly, governance issues. And so I'd like to make a motion to accept this formally from this correspondence as well as police report formally. I would like to make a motion that this email and the police report be sent to the executive committee for the purposes of providing guidance about the appropriate legal, HR, and governance responses to the information that Manager Bill Olson provided to the Minnetonka Police Department.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This will be forwarded as the motion outlines. Thank you, Manager Shepherd.
Thank you.
Is there any other business to come before the commission, or the board, sorry? Then Administrator's report?
Thank you, managers. I have a few things just to kind of update on some previous discussions. There was some questions in previous meetings about the Watershed District's public notice procedures. And just to let everyone know, staff is reviewing those procedures and kind of comparing them with other types of public notices for capital projects, cost share, permitting, et cetera. And we're considering some changes. So a recommendation will be brought to the April workshop for the board's consideration on kind of solidifying and clarifying the public notice procedures. Also, there is a question from a manager at the February 26th meeting asking for a multi-year capital projects plan that in the district. The district CIP is updated and distributed to the cities and counties for comment each year, each June. So staff will have that as a CIP ready for board review at the May workshop meeting. So just as an update on a couple of those past discussion items. Other than that, actually from the meeting tonight, I kind of stopped and had to pause because there's 66,225 carp in Halstead's Bay. And I'm looking at some of those dots where they're aggregating, which is right where my kids swim, so it's kind of frightening to me. But
Give them a fishing boat.
yeah. But I have been out and about in the community, continuing the effort that Telly and her staff have putting together and meeting with various policymakers and staff, including at some of the kickoff meetings and some other things. I've also had direct meetings with staff in Edina, Medina, Victoria, Hopkins, and Minnetonka, with either kind of a combination of the city staff and policymakers. Yesterday and this morning I attended some MAUD events, which were my first experience attending those events. Yesterday morning was the Association of District Administrators meeting, and then this morning was the legislative breakfast, and there were some greetings from a few legislators that were in attendance this morning. At that breakfast, Ray Bowen also publicly thanked the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for their assistance and help with some of the AIS legislation that's pending in front of the group. And just, I'm not sure who participates in the summer tour program that MAUD offers, but that's coming up June 24th to 26th in Duluth is the plan for that this year. So just there'll be some flyers and information available for that soon. Also, kind of really kudos to the staff. We have kind of the initial audit reports for 2014 have kind of been finalized, and there will be a meeting on Monday with Manager Miller to review the audit statement. But all indications are that it's been an extremely thorough and efficient process from a staff perspective and from those conducting the audit, and that it's a good, clean audit for the past calendar year. So that's another thing we'll kind of follow up on. And President White already mentioned that will be part of the discussion at the 26th at an executive committee meeting. And then I guess my last thing is that I think some folks next week on Thursday is the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District event. And I think some managers and also some staff will be attending that next Thursday evening. So
Thank you.
that's all I have.
We are adjourned.
I know. It's you.
I want to talk to you and Darryl. 30 seconds if I can.